has been a week. Hundreds of dwarves gather outside the gates of Erebor. Builders, warriors, dwarves of all skills and professions have joined the expedition. A particular unique group of dwarves have also answered the call. The Orokarni, dwarves of the Red Mountains, far to the east, an often forgotten kingdom of the dwarves. Their ancient ancestors awoke in the far eastern mountain ranges and answered Durin's call to build the halls of Khazad-dûm. After its fall, they fled back to the far east, isolating themselves. Covered in red-tinted armor, they march into the large gathering of dwarves. Approaching Balin, they ask to be accepted on this expedition. They missed out to help their dwarven brethren in the Battle of the Five Armies, so they want to make it up by reclaiming Moria, returning it to its former glory like their ancestors did before them. The other dwarves are in shock to see such an old kingdom of dwarves, almost as if a myth has come to life. Balin is also shocked, but happily agrees. With the dwarves now gathered, Balin gives a speech. Yanad, Durin. Today, we march a great journey to reclaim that which is ours. Today, we take back our home from our great enemy. Today, we return to Moria for the final time and make it our home. Today, we make history. The horns of Erebor are blown, and there is a huge cheer from the crowd. The expedition moves forth. Balin leads the expedition west towards Mirkwood. As the dwarves leave, they begin to sing.
Mountains green, no stain yet on the moon was seen. No words were laid on stream or stone when Durin woke and walked alone. He named the nameless hills and dales. He drank from yet untasted wells. He stooped and looked in nearer near and saw a crown of stars appear as gems upon a silver thread above the shadow of his head.
It is midday on the second day of travel. The dwarves start to unpack and set up camp for the night and get some rest. As the dwarves set up camp, Balin and Flói leave to go meet with Thranduil, so that the expedition can leave early tomorrow morning. As Balin and Flói leave, Ori and Owen decide to create a friendly competition for the expedition. An arena will be made, and the dwarf who's the last one standing will be rewarded with a chest of 1,000 gold pieces, plus a room built just for them when they reclaim Moria. Many join in the competition, including Frar, who believes he can win, and a dwarf Hona. Hona is a female dwarf who stands tall, her height reaching above the average dwarf. Her hair is black, and she has a small, gentle-looking beard on her face. She's wearing thick, heavy armor and carries a giant two-handed hammer. The dwarves enter the arena. As they begin to fall or give up, many more enter to take their place. This is not just a battle of skill, but a battle of endurance as well. The last one standing will be given the reward. As the dwarves begin to tire or are defeated, only two remain, Frar and Hona. Frar's brothers, Nali and Loni, are on the sidelines, cheering their brother on. They encourage him to be careful with Hona. She seemed quite strong, knocking out many dwarves out cold. Loni expresses concern and fears his brother won't win. Frar ignores the concerns of his brothers and takes Hona head on. Both Hona and Frar wield giant warhammers, both heavily armored from head to toe. Frar makes the first move with a horizontal swing. Hona steps back and goes for a vertical swing. Frar switches his grip quickly and blocks the attack with the arm of his hammer. Their weapons collide with a loud clang. Frar rotates his hammer down, bringing Hona's hammer down with it. He elbows her in the face. Hona grunts out in pain and tackles Frar, taking him to the ground. Punches and blocks are thrown out by the both of them, but eventually Frar gets a hold of his hammer by rolling around and hits Hona across the head. Her helmet flies off her head. Hona shakes off the blow. She is bleeding from the nose. She turns her back to Frar and grabs her hammer. Frar, thinking he's about to win, not knowing that Hona grabbed her hammer, goes in for a charge, but Hona is ready. She quickly turns around, swinging her hammer, and she hits him in the stomach and then once again in the back of the head. He is out cold. Loney and Nolly rush to his side. Back to Flowey and Balin, they enter deeper into the forest of Mirkwood. The trees grow high as they nearly block out the sun. Balin and Flowey follow the road, and as the branches of the trees begin to clear, they reach the front gates of Thranduil's halls. Guards approach. Balin explains that they seek an audience with Thranduil, as they have something to return to him. The guards agree to let them in and escort them to the throne room. The guards bring Balin and Flowey to Thranduil, who is sitting on his wooden throne. Branches wrap around the throne and stick out of the top, forming a shape that is similar to elk antlers. They bow. Thranduil questions the dwarf's appearance, as last time Balin was here, it was in a cell, a bold idea to return here uninvited. Balin opens the chest given to him by Dane, revealing the White Gems of Lasgalan, as well as a bracelet and some other jewelry. Thranduil is caught off guard, and at first believes this is a trick. He never thought the dwarves would give him all of the gems back. He composes himself and asks what they want in return. Flowey responds that all they seek is safe passage through Mirkwood. Thranduil asks why, and Balin explains that they seek to reclaim Moria. Thranduil questions if this is a smart choice, as the Balrog still roams the dark halls, but the lives of dwarves do not matter to him, so he agrees to let them pass and will give them an escort so that they don't get lost and end up caught up by spiders again. Balin and Flowey hand the gems and jewelry to Thranduil, they bow, and they leave as they are escorted by elf guards. Thranduil gets up from his throne, carrying the chest of gems, leaving the throne room. He carries the chest into the Chamber of Memory. Inside there are paintings on the walls, artifacts in glass cases, and books on shelves. In the back is armor with a glass case and a painting of an elf maiden above it. Thranduil opens the glass case of armor and opens up the chest. He takes the jewelry from inside and places it around the armor and the armor stand. The white gems match the gems that are embedded into the armor. Thranduil begins to cry. We see the portrait of the female maiden again. The portrait begins to fade into a real face that forms, the same face that was on the portrait. An army of elves and dwarves stand outside the front gates of Gundabad. There is a giant tower in the middle of the wall. The only gate to inside lies at the bottom of the tower. This was Durin's home once, but the orcs took it when Durin fell. Thrain is leading the dwarves, and the elf maiden from the portrait is leading the elves. She has long blonde hair and blue eyes, and wears a crown that looks like tree branches. It is Thranduil's wife. She wears heavy armor and carries a long, two-handed sword. Both are embedded with the White Gems of Lasgalan. Dwarves lead the charge as the giant gates are bashed open by goat battering rams. Inside there is a large host of orcs waiting for them. Leading them is a troll warrior with two large swords in each hand. The warrior troll commands archers to fire. Thrain orders the dwarves to form a shield wall. The dwarf shields are too thick and the arrows bounce off. The troll then orders a charge and the orc army runs forward. The dwarves hold out spears and hold the line, preparing for the assault. Right before the orcs reach the dwarves, Thranduil's wife and her army jump off the back of the dwarves, landing in front of the spears and slicing the orcs as they approach. The dwarves charge into the orcs, yelling and chanting, Baruch Kazad, Kazad Imenu. Thrain leads the charge, running past the elves. The dwarves pull out axes and follow him. They massacre the orcs, who start to flee in fear. The troll roars in anger and calls them all cowards. He charges into the dwarves, killing a large number of them with each swing of his swords. Elven archers release a volley of arrows. The troll blocks some of them, but the rest of the arrows hit him in the small openings in his armor around the joints. The dwarves start slashing the troll. He starts to stagger and retreat. The elves and the dwarves begin to celebrate, but all freeze as they feel a chill in the air. A sense of fear hangs over them. Thranduil's wife looks up and sees a hooded figure sitting upon a heavily armored horse on the mountainside in the distance. It is the Witch King. She looks to Thrain and tells him that this foe is too strong. He and his dwarves must leave now if they are to survive. Thrain refuses to leave her and her army to die. She ignores the plea. The Witch King screams loudly and starts running down the mountain with reinforcements. The dwarves hold their helmets, trying to protect their ears from the scream, and begin to waver. Thrain, conflicted by the choice of leaving a friend to sacrifice herself for him and his people, or dying beside her, decides to retreat. They may not be able to reclaim Gundabad today, but perhaps with reinforcements they can reclaim another lost dwarf kingdom in the future. He must live for the sake of his people. He thanks Thranduil's wife and says his goodbyes. She gives him a hug, and after a quick embrace she pushes him off and tells him to leave. He runs back out the gate with his army. The elves take up a defensive position, spears pointed forward and archers firing at the new orc force. Orcs begin to drop fast as they approach, but the Witch King does not stop, and his horse picks up speed. He charges directly for Thranduil's wife. Right before he reaches the spears of the elves step aside, opening up a path, letting the Witch King ride past. As he gets further through the elven line, the elves start stabbing and slashing at the horse. The horse calls out in pain and starts to slow down. Thranduil's wife takes her sword and slices the horse's head clean off. The Witch King falls off his horse as the horse collapses. He stands up slowly with sword and flail in hand. He lets out a blood-curdling scream. He holds up his sword, a cloud of smoke forms, and spins around the sword as it lights on fire. The weapons of the elves begin to shatter. Thranduil's wife holds up her sword and it begins to glow a bright light. It glows brighter and brighter, sending out a large flash, blinding the Witch King. Thrain and his dwarves escaped, but are met by Thranduil, who has arrived with another elven army for support. He asks Thrain where his wife is. Thrain explains that the Witch King arrived and she asked them to escape while she held him back. Thranduil calls Thrain a coward as the Dwarven army leaves, hoping that one day when Thrain's people are in need, he can deny them of help. Thranduil gathers his forces and charges into Gundabad. The Witch King shakes off the blindness and screams. The orcs start to slaughter the weaponless elves. The Witch King makes a vertical swing with his flail. Thranduil's wife steps to her left to dodge it. The Witch King makes a horizontal swing, but she ducks. The Witch King laughs as he gloats that no living man can kill him. Thranduil's wife recites a phrase that the Witch King has heard once before, a phrase uttered many years ago by the elf lord Glorfindel, that the Witch King's doom would come. She taunts at the Witch King as she peers into the future and also sees the Witch King's fall. It may not be today, but it will come, and it will not come from the hand of man. The Witch King lets out another scream. He goes for another vertical swing with his flail, but this time underhanded. It grazes Thranduil's wife's armor. He continues with the momentum of his swing and spins. His flail hits her sword arm, breaking it with the impact. She cries out in pain and falls down to her knees, holding her broken arm. An elven warrior who's been injured crawls towards the Witch King with a broken blade and stabs him in the back. The Witch King cries out in pain and turns, dropping his sword to the ground. With the flail still in hand, he turns around and with one massive swing sends the elf warrior flying. Thranduil's wife uses this opportunity to make a swing with her sword, but her swing is weak, and the Witch King catches her blade with an open hand. He laughs menacingly. She has failed. A ring on his finger glows an icy blue color, and he slowly starts to freeze Thranduil's wife's sword and hand, turning them to ice. His flail also starts to turn to ice, and with a swing, sends her flying. As Thranduil enters Gundabad, the first thing he sees is his wife flying towards him. She slams into the fortress walls beside him. Thranduil rushes to her side, and he sees ice shards in her chest and stomach. She is shivering. She looks up at him. She apologizes for her choice to save her dwarf friends, and then tells Thranduil she loves him and Legolas. Her body goes limp. Thranduil lets out a scream. In a rage and with tears down his face, he charges into the orcs, killing a large number of them. But as the Witch King approaches, one of Thranduil's guards stops him. Thranduil wants to fight, but the guard emphasizes the sacrifice his wife made. She wanted them to live, and the dwarves to live as well. Don't let her sacrifice be in vain. Elves blow horns to sound the retreat. Thranduil and his army return to Mirkwood defeated. The horns fade as we transition back to Thranduil alone in the Chamber of Memory. He weeps in remembrance of his wife. A guard enters the room and tells Thranduil he is needed in the halls. Thranduil regains his composure and exits the chamber. Balin and Flowey return to camp with the elf guards. They let the expedition know they were given safe passage through Mirkwood and leave first thing tomorrow morning. In a large tent, we see Frar, laying on a bed from his encounter with Hona. His eyes blink open. He squints at the bright light pouring in from above. Nolly and Loney sit nearby, packing up their things to move out. They hear their brother stir awake and walk over to him. Nolly and Loney poke fun at him for losing, and hopefully he's learned a lesson. Frar says that he will do better next time and win. As Frar now begins packing, Hona arrives at the tent. She has come to check in and see if Frar is okay. Frar tries to play it off as it was planned this way somehow. Nolly, confused by why Frar planned on being knocked out, says he will be fine and thanks Hona for coming by. Hona and Frar get into a debate on who won. Frar underestimated her. Frar didn't view this as a real fight and was going easy. He's been in real battles with goblins and hopes that Hona will never have to experience that. Hona talks about her history, how she fought with her father in the Battle of the Five Armies. She learned how to fight drakelings and defend her home. Frar isn't the only one who's had to learn how to fight. He may think he's a skilled fighter, but he still has a lot to learn. Hello! Thank you again, as always, for sticking around and watching. I appreciate it. Once again, if you liked it, leave a comment. Tell me what you liked. If you didn't like something, let me know. But yeah. So let's talk about episode 3. I guess to start, we'll talk about the song or the poem. So for those that don't know, in the book, The Fellowship of the Ring, there is a song or poem that Tolkien wrote that Gimli sings or recites while the Fellowship is in Moria. So I thought, while writing the script years ago, it would be a really cool idea to incorporate that into the script, into the story. So the entire poem or song, whatever you want to call it, does exist throughout the show. So we just have this first part. I think there's going to be like 2 or 3 more verses, and the whole thing will be in the story. This is just the first verse. But the music or the singing that you heard didn't come from me. Some of you may have recognized it if you've played a game called Return to Moria. But yeah, so the song comes from the game Return to Moria. It's a base building survival type game about Gimli in the Fourth Age gathering dwarves to retake Moria. Very similar, actually, to what our story is about, which is kind of funny. But yeah, so the song was performed by, I guess, the developers of the game, Free Range Games. They're the ones that made the game. They hired the singers and the orchestra and all that to make the song. They just used the lyrics, like I did, that were from the book. So the lyrics come from Tolkien, but the singing and music that you heard comes from Free Range Games in Return to Moria. So I just wanted to establish that first. I don't want credit for the song. I don't want credit for the music. That belongs to Free Range Games. They just have their original soundtrack on iTunes and stuff like that, and their website. So I've bought it from them, and I just thought it would be really cool to kind of show what the work that they've done as well, since we're both using the same poem and whatnot. I'm just using them to supply the music because I'm not a singer. and I'm not a musical person in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, that's where the song comes from, or the music comes from, but the lyrics were made by Tolkien. All right. So with that part out of the way, because I know some people would probably be asking about that. Um, the little mini Easter egg that I decided to put in, the dwarves of the Orocarni. So I know Tolkien didn't really mention them at all for the most part. There was 2, maybe 3 dwarf kingdoms that awoke in the east, some mountain range in the far east. These mountain ranges are called the mountain range is called the Red Mountains. Orocarni is a direct translation out of Red Mountain Dwarf, kind of. So that's where they come from. They may have been... Sauron may have used some of them in his armies. Rune may have encountered them. The Blue Dwarves may have encountered them. But for the most part, they kind of remained isolated, alone, didn't kind of partake in the events of Middle-earth as far as we're aware. So I thought it would be cool to kind of, again, show more of the Dwarven culture, bring in this new dwarf kingdom as just something fun, while also keeping true to the lore. So I'm not using them to change an outcome of anything, to rewrite history by any means. It's just, if there's a massive battle to appear, maybe in the armies of dwarves that are fighting orcs and goblins, you would see some of them with this red tinted armor. Like, oh, those are the dwarves from that Red Mountain place. Okay, cool. But that's the extent of it. It was really just an Easter egg and a small little reference to this potential dwarf kingdom that isn't mentioned a whole lot. That's all they are. I thought it was fun to do. So then now let's talk about Hona. Hona's gone through many different iterations with this story. I originally had her as kind of like a Mulan character, where the characters and the audience wouldn't know she was a female dwarf. So she enters the arena, she's beating up these dwarves, she's winning. But then when Frar hits her in the head with his hammer and her helmet flies off, it would then be revealed that she's a female. So I kind of played with that a little bit. But then I thought about it and decided against it, as I thought it would be... Well, if we're thinking back to Gimli's line in the movies where dwarf women are often mistaken for dwarf men. So... no one would know the difference anyways, theoretically. Like, you do this reveal, but you wouldn't know it was a woman anyways, in theory. So then I kind of took away the Mulan thing and just thought it would be cool for an audience perspective, not necessarily for the characters or for the story, but from an audience perspective to see a dwarf female. At the time of writing this, which was long before Rings of Power, we've never seen a dwarf female character, aside from the ones that Peter Jackson threw in the background in the opening of the first Hobbit movie. Obviously, now with Rings of Power, they've shown their dwarf females, and they wanted to brag about it, but I thought, okay, let's just have a character who's a dwarf female, show that to the audience, but the characters don't care. They're just their culture just embraces, doesn't even necessarily embrace. It's just, you're a dwarf, I'm a dwarf, we're all dwarves, we're here to be dwarf-like and have fun. That's all it is. And it's just more of a fun little experience for the audience to see a dwarf female character. Now, to be clear, Tolkien never wrote Hona. Hona is a character I created. And I went with a female dwarf for the reasons previously mentioned of I think it would be fun for the audience to see a female dwarf in action, but also Tolkien doesn't have a lot of females in the story. The ones he does have, though, are very good, very powerful. Arwen, Galadriel, Éowyn, and there's many others, but we're focusing on just the movies. Those three characters are obviously super powerful, super good, strong characters that we all love. Peter Jackson, of course, then included Tauriel into The Hobbit for kind of the same reason of when you look at the story, there's actually no female character, which is what I was encountering once I finished my story, before I had Hona in it, I was like, wait a minute, there's not a single female character in the story, aside from Thranduil's wife, who we'll get to later. And I thought it seemed weird. And it kind of shows the writings of Tolkien, which maybe that's fair and I could keep it that way. But, just to bring in more audience members, more fans, where's that female character that people can root for as well? We root for Arwen, Éowyn, Galadriel, Tauriel, let's throw in another one. So that's where Hona came from. And because I know people are going to be talking about this, as they did with Rings of Power, this is not a female boss character, right? It's not like Galadriel, who gets what she wants in Rings of Power, can act however she wants. It is nothing like that. The whole idea is that you could take Hona and make her a male, make her whatever you wanted, remove the female part of it, and absolutely nothing in the story would change. The whole purpose of her character is to show Frar that he is not the only one that has had a hard life, that has trained super strictly, that has been in battles. He is not the strongest warrior, and there's more to life and more to being a dwarf than just being a strong fighter. So that's the whole purpose of the character of Hona, is to kind of snap Frar out of reality. Hey, buddy, your two brothers like to joke around with you, but let's get serious. You're not the best. You're not the strongest dwarf here. You're not the only dwarf that's had it rough. You're not the only dwarf that had to learn how to fight to survive. You're not the only one like that. I am like that too. Lots of people are like that. So that's the whole purpose. It just so happens that Hona is a female because there's no females in the story. So gotta throw them in there. And that's all it is. So hopefully as we learn more about Hona and we go more through the story, hopefully you'll like her more. But yeah. Now we'll get to the part that I'm really proud of, that I put a lot of work into from the script's perspective, that I did a lot of problem solving around, and that I know Tolkien didn't write about, but I wanted to do something with it. Now, not the whole purpose, but one of the main goals of my story that I wanted to write was I wanted to help continue bridging the gap between Tolkien's works and Peter Jackson's movies. I didn't want to write a story and say my story is separate from the two. I am saying my story is connected to the two of them. So a way for me to do that was through these White Gems of Lasgalan, which Tolkien didn't really write a whole lot about, but Peter Jackson made a huge emphasis on it in the Hobbit movie with Thranduil and wanting the gems, and it helped, show the rift between dwarf and elf, because Thranduil wanted the gems, dwarves didn't want to give them back to him, yada yada yada. So, and at the time of writing it, I thought, okay, this would be a good opportunity for the dwarves to return those gems because I want to show the rebuilding of that bond between elf and dwarf, and the dwarves need safe passage through Mirkwood. So this is just a good way to do that. And so that's where I used the gems, but I also wanted to explain why the gems were so important. Because in the Hobbit movies, we don't get a full understanding of why the gems are important. We know Thranduil cares about them, we know he wants them, and we know the dwarves didn't give them back to him. But why are they so important? So through teases of Legolas mentioning his mom dying in Gundabad and Thranduil's talk about love to Tauriel, I thought, okay, what if these gems are connected to his wife? Maybe she wore this jewelry, maybe she had them embedded in his armor, a bit of both, whatever. So that's where I came up with the concept of, okay, these gems are tied to his wife. How do I show that? Because we know nothing about Thranduil's wife. Tolkien doesn't say anything. Peter Jackson just threw out a random line with Legolas saying that she died in Gundabad. So I was like, okay, what do I do with the wife? Let's do a flashback sequence here and show the wife and show why these gems are so important. Now, who was the wife? Was she just a queen or a princess, a maiden, or whatever? It's like, well, maybe, but why would she have died in Gundabad if she was just like an elf queen? Right? Because the elves never owned Gundabad, so why was she there? The dwarves haven't owned Gundabad for thousands of years, so again, why was she there? So it had to have been a battle with orcs or the Witch King, which I think Legolas mentions about the Witch King maybe as well in that little speech about his mom dying in Gundabad. Maybe not, but doesn't matter. So I thought, okay, she died in a fight in Gundabad. What did she die to? Well, I don't know. I feel like I gotta make her somewhat powerful and a skilled fighter, considering she's married to Thranduil, who's like the most skilled fighter ever, and her son is Legolas, who's just a badass elf who has amazing feats of his own. So she can't just die to a simple orc. So then I thought of the troll warrior, who I thought, okay, she could die to this fancy troll warrior that I created, but I don't know, can we go bigger? And then I did some research and I found that there was like this, it was like a 10 to 50 year gap where the dwarves wanted to retake Gundabad. Thrain specifically wanted to retake Gundabad, and the Witch King was still alive. Alive as in it was just before the process of like taking over Arnor and everything like that, or it was like during the process of taking all that over and he wasn't quite defeated yet. So I thought, okay, there's a little gap in the timeline where I can have Thrain wanting to retake Gundabad and have the Witch King there. The Witch King would be a great enemy to kill Thranduil's wife. So that's what I ended up writing. Thrain alongside Thranduil's wife to again show the bond that is strong, that it was once strong again between the two races. They're working together to fight a common enemy. They almost win, but the Witch King shows up and ruins the day. So Thrain can't die there. So he has to learn that he's willing. He has to be willing to retreat, as much as he may not want to leave his friend, Thranduil's wife, behind. He has to stay alive for his people so that they still have a home have someone to follow to reclaim a home. Because it turns out that after a failed attempt at Gundabad, Thrain and Thror lead the assault on Moria shortly after, which is what we saw in the Hobbit films, that little flashback sequence. It's also known as the Battle of Zulzimbar or something like that. I know I'm pronouncing it wrong, but that's the battle that happens after Gundabad, which Tolkien did write about that. So I thought, okay, so I got that part good. So now we just have to find a way to make this moment of Thranduil's wife's death important. So she tells the dwarves to leave, and then she has this stand with the Witch King. So I wanted that to be somewhat symbolic or similar and what's the word I'm looking for? Remind people of the fight between Éowyn and the Witch King. So I used kind of the same choreography in the descriptions. Maybe you caught on to it, maybe you didn't. Of the Witch King does a swing, she steps to the side, he does another swing, it bounces off her chest, he does the full spin, and then the backhand, or on the return, Éowyn blocks it with her shield, but Thranduil's wife doesn't have a shield, so it just hits her arm and breaks her arm. And then you have the elf stabbing him in the back, and then, well, her death. But what I also wanted to show, to connect it back to Tolkien's works, was that the elf lord, for those that don't know, the elf lord Glorfindel, who you may not even know because you've only watched the movies, which is totally fine, is a super important elf essentially. And during the Witch King's peak in power, Glorfindel made a comment that the Witch King would fall at some point, but he would not fall or die to the hand of man. So connecting that back to me introducing that the words have power in our story, like the Doors of Durin. Flowey is going to have some moments with words being magical and having power behind them. I think it connects really well because there's tons of interpretation of what Glorfindel was doing. Was he cursing the Witch King? Was he just making a comment? Did he just say something and then through magic itself, he like unintentionally cursed the Witch King? Did the words get to his head and that now the Witch King uses this as a way to like scare his enemies? No man can kill me, I'm immortal kind of thing. Like, so there's many ways to interpret that, but I wanted to make a reference to it because that prophecy, so to speak, was introduced or created by Glorfindel. So I wanted to just throw that in there and have Thranduil's wife kind of mention it, be like, yeah, Glorfindel said that no man could kill you. I've also peered into your future and have seen you fail, but don't worry, if it's not today, it will come, and it will not come from the hand of man. And in my head, it's just a really powerful moment of she's standing up to this super powerful evil force. She thinks she's failing. She sees her men dying around her, and she thinks she's failed, but she peers into the future as some elves can, and she gets this glimmer of hope. She sees, in her mind, her son Legolas living a long, happy life, succeeding against the enemy. She sees a glimpse of Éowyn fighting the Witch King and gets like this glimmer of hope, all this fear now is all gone, and that if she can also emphasize the words of Glorfindel, maybe that's just enough to like push the Witch King over the edge at some point in the future, that maybe at the Witch King's finest hour or final hour, he'll think back to this moment. Like, all these things are just going through her head, and she like almost accepts her fate. but uses that as a way to fight back, and it pisses off the Witch King. I wanted to introduce some more of his magic. I thought, maybe during his time in Angmar and the fall of Arnor and everything, he had maybe some fun ice magic, which I thought was kind of fun. And that because he was at his peak power at this point almost, as he wasn't defeated yet, why does he not have ice magic in The Return of the King? I'm not the one to have... I don't know, aside from, well, maybe after he was defeated after the fall of Arnor, he lost some of his power. Every time he's defeated or dies, he loses some of it. He's not as strong as he once is, whatever. But I just wanted to do something different. So that's where the ice magic is. And then Thranduil arrives after being pissed off with Thrain for leaving his wife to die. The first thing he sees when he enters the battle is his wife being flown across the battlefield, slamming into the walls of Gundabad and falling. And he gets there and he just sees his wife dies in front of him. And I thought that was just a really powerful moment, that everything he loved dies with him. And who Thranduil is in The Hobbit is is because of this moment almost. His hatred towards dwarves is now tenfold. They're the reason his wife died, so to speak. And that's why he doesn't think love is real, or is real if it hurts so much, all those kinds of things that he talks to Tauriel about. So it come from this moment. So I don't know. I'm really proud of that specific sequence. I worked really hard on it, but maybe you hate it, and that's totally okay. I'm so attached to it because to me, it's a lot of my own work and my own interpretation rather than taking stuff that Peter Jackson and Tolkien did and just bridging the gap. It's kind of it's a combination of all three of us. I took Peter Jackson, I took Tolkien, and I took my own interpretation and put it all together, and I got this scene. That I don't know. I just feel good about that. But if you hate it, let me know. Maybe you don't like it, or maybe I didn't tell it as perfectly as I wanted to. But let me know. Was there anything else to talk about there? So there's the warrior troll. The warrior troll is a reference to a character from a Lord of the Rings game. I have a name in the script, but I don't, for script purposes when you're making a movie, but I don't actually think his name is said in dialogue at all. It might come up later, so I haven't named him for you guys yet in case it comes up later. But if you know who he's based off of another warrior troll from a Lord of the Rings game. It's not the same one. It's just, you could call him his brother. It's where the warrior troll really comes from, though, is when Tolkien talks about Moria. Without going into spoilers, too many spoilers just yet, Tolkien references a dwarf character dies to a great warrior troll. That's what Tolkien says. So I was like, this great warrior troll should be unique. And the most unique troll I could think of was this troll from this game, who's also could be similar to the troll that Aragorn fights at the Black Gate in the Return of the King movie. So that's who the warrior troll is. But yeah, I hope you liked it. As always, leave a comment, share, tell your friends. The support I've been getting has been great so far, and I thank you for that. Yeah, keep talking about it, keep sharing it. really, if there's something that you, even if there's something that you don't like, leave a comment and we'll talk about it. Like, let's just have a discussion. But and even if there's something that you do like now, we'll talk about it too. I don't know. I'm really thankful for you guys that have been watching and have been saying that you've loved it. The people have said that they like how much I've put the lore into it, which I appreciate that recognition, because I've tried really hard to find that balance between Tolkien's lore, Peter Jackson's lore, and my own interpretations. And there's been some comments saying that this is better than Rings of Power, which I thank you for saying those things. That also means a lot, considering I did send this script to Amazon and they said no, and they turned around and made Rings of Power. So it gives me kind of like it makes me proud that what I wrote was actually good. So that does make me feel good. And I know you may not everyone may feel that way, but I've been seeing those comments on the many different platforms that I've posted this on. So I do thank you for that, and it does mean a lot. So yeah, sorry that this episode took longer to upload. It was a busy week, so I couldn't get this exactly 1 week later after episode 2, but I did try. Yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for your support, and hopefully I'll get the second or the fourth episode out slightly sooner. I'll still try. If I don't get it out by Tuesday again, it'll still be. I will always try to do a week, one episode a week. But yeah, enough of my rambling. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you. Remember that you're loved and cared about, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.